The war in Ukraine could end next year, according to The Economist. Meanwhile, Biden's aides try to convince President Biden and propose to provide Ukraine with nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is ready to nominate his special representative on Ukraine. So why the war in Ukraine could be finished next year, and how is this even possible under the Trump's administration? The Economist reported about the possible scenarios on Ukraine on the next year. So war in Ukraine could be finished as early as next year, as both Ukraine and Russia can start negotiations on the possible scenarios on the war in Ukraine. So according to The Economist, Russia and Ukraine will try to reach peaceful settlement of this war as early as next year, as both sides are too exhausted to continue to fight this war. However, Russia could continue to occupy territory of Ukraine in exchange of Ukraine's membership in NATO. It's really important to say that Ukraine should get bold and serious security guarantees in case of any kind of a ceasefire with Russia, because it's really important for Ukraine to receive security guarantees to deter Russia from invading Ukraine again in the future, because in such case it would not have any kind of big impact for just and a good peace in Ukraine. Also, according to the New York Times, President Biden and his allies proposing to provide Ukraine with strategic weapons in exchange of a ceasefire in Ukraine, and also Ukraine could be invited to join NATO to have any kind of security guarantees. And it's really important to deter Putin to attack Ukraine again, and it's only possible with strength, by conducting this policy of peace through strength, because unless Ukraine gets bold security guarantees, Putin will invade Ukraine again, attack Ukraine and other NATO allies. Meanwhile, Reuters reported about the Kremlin proposals on the ceasefire. Vladimir Putin demands Ukraine to capitulate and to limit its own military capabilities. So according to Reuters, Kremlin is ready for a ceasefire, but only on Vladimir Putin's terms. So according to Vladimir Putin, Ukraine should limit the size of its armed forces, should be banned from joining NATO, and should have a ceasefire on the current front lines. In exchange to this, Russia would stop its illegal war against Ukraine and will freeze the conflict. So however, Kremlin officially denies this proposal and says that Kremlin is not ready to freeze the war in Ukraine. So it's interesting situation, because we have a Reuters publication. At the same time, Kremlin denies its willingness to reach a peaceful settlement of the war in Ukraine. However, according to Bloomberg, President Biden has allowed Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia to strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position, to help Ukraine to have a better position during the negotiations with Russia as early as next year. So with long-range strikes inside Russia, Ukraine would be able to put more pressure on Vladimir Putin to force him to negotiate with Ukraine in good faith on appropriate terms for both sides. This is the main strategic objective of the President Biden's strategy on allowing Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia with Western-made weapons. Meanwhile, Jake Sullivan, President Biden's advisor on national security, says that he works with Mike Waltz, Trump's national security advisor, to discuss the possible scenarios on the war in Ukraine. So Jake Sullivan is working around the clock to conduct negotiations with Russia and Ukraine. Jake Sullivan tries to convince Mike Waltz that the Trump administration really can end the war, but through the peace, can reach peace through the strength. That's why it's important to continue to provide Ukraine with additional military support, military assistance, and put more pressure on Putin to allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia, to force Putin to negotiate with Ukraine in good faith to end this war on just and good terms. However, Mike Waltz, President Trump's national security advisor, said that President Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia is another escalation in this war. However, his supporter provided Ukraine with mines, and it's a good sign that Mike Waltz can advise Donald Trump to have a strong position, to be tough on Putin, to force him to negotiate and to end the war on normal terms, not to urge Ukraine to capitulate, but to urge Ukraine to negotiate with Russia from a position of strength. That's how this war could be ended on just and peace terms. Also, meanwhile, Donald Trump is ready to appoint another nominee in his team. Trump is ready to appoint his national security advisor and special representative on foreign affairs, Richard Grenell. So Richard Grenell can become the next special representative of Donald Trump on the U.S. Biden's and Trump administration. Richard Grenell is a former U.S. ambassador to Germany. Previously, he had some interesting ideas on Ukraine. However, we haven't heard any new statements from Richard Grenell on how he should end the war in Ukraine. However, now we have official position of Mike Waltz. In his recent article in The Economist, he wrote that the war could be ended by putting more pressure on Putin, by blackmailing Putin about providing Ukraine with additional weapons. So Trump can easily threaten Vladimir Putin, threatened him with additional support for Ukraine, and that's why Putin could be forced to negotiate with Ukraine in a good faith. So let's hope that President Trump will be tough on Putin and will not undermine U.S. interests around the globe, and just peace in Ukraine is in the American national interest, that Ukraine would be have a just, long and just peace, not on Russian but on Ukrainian terms. Russia should not be rewarded on Russia's aggression should not be rewarded, and that's why this serves critical U.S. national interest around the globe. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, stay with us on YouTube, and glory to Ukraine!